Good evening, one and all. Today is the second day of our talk, our series titled "Literature as Cultural Discourse: Charting the Explorations." Today we have with us Dr. Ajay S. Shekhar, Assistant Professor, Research Supervisor and Coordinator of Center for Buddhist Studies, Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kaladi. Uh, so, without much ado, let me welcome our beloved HOD, uh, Lakshmi ma'am, to deliver the welcome speech.
Thank you, Arti. Good evening to one and all. Today we have gathered here to participate in the second session of webinar series on cultural studies conducted by PG Department of English, Government College, Attingal. Culture, as we know, forms the identity of a society. Culture, as an informal system, can greatly influence the social psychology, thinking mode, and behavior of a society. It can affect greatly the economic, political, and literary spheres of a region. As a result, study of regional cultures has become an integral part of culture studies. I am sure that today's session on cultural studies and regional cultures, questions of contextualization and justification by the eminent academician Dr. Ajay S. Shekhar, Assistant Professor, Research Supervisor and Coordinator of Center for Buddhist Studies, Sri Shankara University, Kaladi, will be amply enlightening to the student and faculty community alike. On behalf of PG Department of English, Government College, Attingal, I warmly welcome Dr. Ajay S. Shekhar to this webinar session. It is a great pleasure and honor for us to have you here, sir. I use this opportunity to congratulate our dynamic webinar coordinator, Smita John teacher, and also Dr. Neville, sir, who has given the valuable technical support for the successful organization of this program. Last but not the least, I warmly welcome all the participants who are present via online to this academically enriching webinar session. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I call upon Smita John, the coordinator of this webinar series, to, to speak a few words about our chief speaker.
Respected Lakshmi Ma'am, Head of the Department of English of Government College, Attingal, the Chief Guest of the day, and Honorable Resource Person, Dr. Ajay Shekhar, Research Supervisor and Coordinator of the Center of Buddhist Studies, who has come here, who is along with us here for the keynote address. Now, as we know, we are on the second session of the webinar that our PG Department of English in association with IQAC is conducting, which is titled Literature as Cultural Discourse, Charting the Explorations. And we are indeed, as the coordinator, I am proud to introduce Dr. Ajay S. Shekhar, sir, who is presenting his topic, Cultural Studies and Regional Cultures, Questions of Contextualization and Justification. The plurality and multiplicity of the Indian culture is evident to the whole world, as India has one of the world's largest collection of songs, music, dance, theatre, folk traditions, performing arts, rites, rituals, languages, dialects, paintings, and writings. And I think to discuss this, there is none other than Dr. Ajay Shekhar, because he is closely associated with all that, especially in connection with our region, Kerala. His doctoral research is on the representation of caste and gender, margins in the post-colonial Indian fiction. And he has published articles and translations on literature and culture in English and Malayalam in leading journals, including the Economic and Political Weekly. Not only an eminent academician, he's a versatile genius who has published many books of class, an eminent speaker. He is well known as an orator and is of and actually a star speaker in the academic circle, a painter and a photographer, a cinematographer, and whatnot. So, combining literature with all the aspects of art, he is indeed the right person to present a talk on cultural studies. And sir, we are greatly honored to have you here along with us for the session. Welcome, sir. Wholeheartedly, the Department of English welcomes you. Welcome you.
A gentle reminder to all the participants, kindly keep your mics muted. I welcome you, Haji sir, for the talk. We are all ears. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, and thank you so much for the kind and elaborate introduction. I am truly honored and delighted to be with you this evening uh, to to pay homage to one of the greatest thinkers of the world, contemporary world, and one of the leading intellectuals, especially from the African American and feminist vantages. Bell Hooks, as she is known throughout the world as the leading thinker, the feminist thinker, the African American scholar, and lead academic, a distinguished, highly eminent, distinguished professor of English. Uh, though she was in the United States, she is well known all over the world. And even in Kerala, we are proud. I am truly honored to be part of this homage that is given to bell hooks as a one of the leading exponents of cultural studies, as a lead thinker and cultural activist and researcher and academic and speaker, and as a wholesome organic intellectual. We salute bell hooks and the fabulous, tremendous work that she has left behind, the kind of speeches, the talks, the conversations, the books, more than 30 books and hundreds of essays, critical essays and critical concepts. And she has reimagined the whole humanities and cultural theory and cultural studies, the practice of cultural studies in an unprecedented fashion. He has revised and renewed the whole discipline of English language, English studies, and the transition into cultural studies and critical humanities at large, and also contributed to philosophy and social theory and social sciences in general. So we salute before the memory of beloved bell hooks, and this is an apt tribute. Let me acknowledge and realize and state that this is the apt kind of tribute that is given to a leading feminist thinker of the world by the academic world of Kerala. So nowhere we have seen it. So you have shown the initiative, and I congratulate you all, and I'm really honored and proud to be part of this academic venture by the Government College Attingal, the Department of English at Government College Attingal, the principal, the respected HOD, the other distinguished professors of the department, Ms. Smita and Ms. Arati and Dr. Neville Wilson and all the others. I'm not even aware of their names, but I congratulate all of you, and I thank you for this opportunity at the outset. So, bell hooks as a model in cultural theory and cultural studies. That's the foundation that we have for today. I hope I'm audible and clear because of the network issues now. Since it's a busy hour in the evening, that's why I'm checking. Am I clearly audible?
Sure, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it is indeed a historic moment and a very crucial juncture in the social formations and history and the political life of India to remember an African American woman scholar like bell hooks in the context of the academic debate on cultural studies today. So, as I mentioned earlier, bell hooks has been, she has remained, especially towards the end of the last century, towards the end of the 20th century, by the 1990s, bell hooks established herself as the leading African American scholar and woman scholar on issues of culture and society and polity in the United States. At least from the beginning of this century, in the 21st century, she was accepted throughout the world in higher academia. That is the phenomenal kind of uh, welcome and acceptance and inclusion that she has enjoyed, in especially in the third world, especially in places like Asia and Africa, and also in Latin America. Though she was from speaking and writing from the United States in the northern hemisphere, she was readily acceptable. All the books, all the theoretical works, her theory is flowing like poetry. That is a peculiarity of the critical thinking and critical writing of theoretical, philosophical, abstract kind of writing, but in very simple language, in very what you call the tangible kind of expressions, very permeable kind of messages and exchanges. She used to deliver her speeches, and also she used to write in that kind of simplicity and clarity and ethical and political kind of a punch. She used to deliver it and establish her point. So that kind of directness and frankness and intellectual integrity of a speaker and writer, of a thinker, of an organic intellectual and thinker, we have in bell hooks. So her works, especially dealing with education, her works dealing with love at large, humanity, and love as the ethics for humanity. Her philosophy of transformation through education and also through mutual love and greater compassion at large. So these are lasting values and lasting kind of models for the exponents and students of cultural studies, let me say from the beginning. So this love ethics that is taught by bell hooks, that is actually the civilizational kind of precipitation we have at the bottom of our life and the bottom of humanity. So she has touched the socio-cultural bottom of humanity, and she has precipitated this compassion and love for the whole world, and also especially for the children and the posterity, the young generation, the coming generation. She has talked about and written about the coming generation and the posterity at large. So that compassionate paradigm, that inclusive paradigm, that egalitarian paradigm, that is all encompassing, like the universal love that as her own models and her own teachers, like Jesus Christ taught, love as the universal truth, love as God itself. Usually they say himself, God himself, but that's a kind of Judeo-Christian imagination of the God. Actually, people like Jesus and bell hooks, they have transcended that anthropomorphic or anthrocentric imagination of the Purusha Daivam, or the Purusha God, as if in the Vedic imagination that was, or that is now being revived in India. According to the Rigvedic Purusha Sukta, God, or the universal Brahman, or Atman or Brahma, is imagined as a Purusha, as a male. And this happens even in the Semitic kind of imagination. In the Old Testament tradition, you have God as a male, a macho, who is sitting over there as a dictator and dictating things onto the whole world. So instead of that kind of God as himself, they have imagined, especially the womanists in African American context, whether it is from the 19th or early 18th century onwards, from that historic speech of Sojourner Truth, from where Bell Hooks herself, she has taken that title, Ain't I a Woman? Black Women and Feminism. Black women can also talk about feminism. They are also women. Black women or women of color, they are also women. They are also human beings. That kind of a claim to be human and a claim to be equal. That has been there from the early writings and expressions of the slaves in America, especially from Phyllis Wheatley, that slave girl who wrote poetry in English language, who was recently rehabilitated only towards the end of the last century, late 20th century. The memory of Sojourner Truth and that Phyllis Wheatley, that slave girl who perished as a little girl, but still she wrote and published her poetry in English language. So that kind of a tradition you have in the womanist tradition. So the womanists traditionally, they have imagined from the 18th century in America, the black women of color, they have imagined God as a woman or a transgender kind of substance or entity or being, which is a cosmic kind of being, or which is actually the cosmic love or cosmic or universal love, which was originally immortalized by Jesus on the cross. And also, even before Jesus, it is the same message that Buddha also taught. And later in the CE 7th century, it is the prophet who elaborated about the universal brotherhood and the fraternity and egalitarian kind of paradigm in Arabia. So it is the message of the unique teachers of the world, from the Buddha, from the Tirthankaras of Jainism in India, from the Sikh gurus of India, which is a recent religion, which is a religion which originated somewhere in the 15th and 16th century in India. So from the ancient 2,500 years old, more than 2,500 years old Buddhism, to Christianity, which is almost 2,000 years old, more than that now, and 1,300 years of Islam, or Judaism, which predates it all, Christianity at least, and in Sikhism, and in every Parsi religion, and all the religions, even in the Baha'i religion, which is the latest kind of religion, which is supposed to be a secular hybrid kind of religion, like the Din Ilahi of Akbar the Great in India, the Mughals and all. Even in the Baha'i religion, you have that universal kind of love ethics. There is nothing but justice in the Baha'i religion. And also in the ancient Indian religions, which were the first missionary religions of the world, that is Jainism and Buddhism in particular, which has its foundation in the Indus Valley tradition of the ascetics, the Shramana tradition, or the Amana, or in Tamil it is called the Changam or the Sangham tradition of India and South India in particular. You don't have the foundation on the god, especially the male god, as in the Vedic Brahmanical tradition. In the Rigvedic tradition, according to the Purusha Sukta, the god is a male. But in the ancient ethical religions, egalitarian democratic religions of the world, like Buddhism and Jainism, there is no god at all. There is not even the concept of God. There is only ethics. Only ethics, or the dharma in ancient Prakrit languages of India. In Pali in particular, which was used by the Buddha for his gospel, it is called dharma, the ethics, the ethical and moral codes of conduct and the ethical principles that govern the world. We exist. We have this agreement with the universe. That agreement, that ethical code of conduct, that pact is called the Sangha pact, is called the Dharma or the ethics. So there is nothing but the Dharma or ethics in this greater, what you call, ethical egalitarian democratic religious traditions of the world, especially in Buddhism and Jainism. So they have no concept of the God and the God as the male or the ruling dictator, but only in the Vedic Brahmanical religion you have it as the what you call the Virat Purusha, the Brahma Purusha, and Purusha giving birth to various fourfold varnas, the Chatur Varnis. Of Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra from various body organs of the Virat Purusha. There is no mention, unfortunately, about women and their role in human regeneration and procreation and upbringing of children and all. And also, there is no mention about the avarnas, those who are outside this Chaturvarnya system of Brahman head, Kshatriya hands, and Vaishya thighs, and the Pada Shudra kind of classification. That is the Chaturvarnya or Varnashrama Dharma system, where you don't have that kind of a mention about the key role of women. So bell hooks was actually fighting against this kind of patriarchal kind of imagination of the world. And that is what she has conceived critically as something called a white supremacist capitalist patriarchy of America and the West in particular. So that is what is identified as the evil and the problem of the world, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. She also, as a queer kind of person, she also challenged the heteronormativity within the patriarchal structure. The patriarchal society is heteronormative and it is homophobic. Therefore, she also called this white capitalist supremacist patriarchy as something called heteropatriarchy. So she critiqued the foundations of the civilizations of the world, and she identified, like the Indian scholars, the Indian feminists have identified after Baba Saheb Ambedkar, Sharmila Rege or Anupama Rao or Abhinay Ramesh, and all the Dalit Bahujan scholars, and even the mainstream feminist historians of India, like Uma Chakrabarti and others, V. Geeta and Kalpana Kannabiran and others, they have all talking about Brahmanical patriarchy. It's a concept that was created, a critical kind of framework, a critical model that was developed from the study of ancient religions and comparative social, cultural, sociological kind of analysis by B.R. Ambedkar himself. So all the Indian historians, all the Indian feminists, all the Dalit Bahujan feminists, they are attacking and critiquing something called the Brahmanical patriarchy in India. And in the West, especially in the United States and Europe, bell hooks was actually criticizing this dominant formation, this centralized repressive power structure, which is an unequal kind of system that is called the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, or simply hetero patriarchy in simple terms. So anyway, she has revolutionized social sciences and cultural studies and the English pedagogy itself through the incorporation of these key critical concepts. Criticism of sexism and racism in particular in the West, as casteism is the problem of India. As the Dalit Bahujan feminists in India, they are attacking and critiquing casteism and its nexus with sexism. That's the concept of Brahmanical patriarchy. It is not simply universal patriarchy, but a patriarchy which is having cultural specifications. That's why it's called Brahmanical. Brahmanical means based on the Brahmanical kind of text and internal imperialism of India, the Brahmanical Hindu colonialism of India, which is based on an imperial textuality of the Smriti, Shruti, and Puranic traditions. The Smriti, Shruti, Puranas of India, that is the imperial, internal imperialist textuality of the internal imperialism of caste and varna, or the Brahmanical colonization of India. So you find remarkable similarities between the Indian condition of the nexus between casteism and sexism. And in the West, it is racism and sexism. The issue of class, of course, is there. Class matters. Bell Hooks herself, she has written and published that book. She has written multiple volumes, almost 20 volumes are on the intersectionality of race and gender and class also. She has written a particular book, Class Matters, about the issue of class itself within the people of color, how class distinctions, how the economic distinctions are further creating divides and inequalities, multiplying inequalities, especially in the context of late capitalism in the United States of America. That was her concern. So she has developed the concept of heteropatriarchy or white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. And also she has elaborated about the multiplicity of inequality in the contemporary societies in the world, which she called the intersectionality of not just class, but class, race, and gender, and also sexuality, region, religion, language, and other ethnic factors are also the so-called superstructural factors are also contributing in the multiple marginality and multiple exclusions and simultaneous presence of these many kind of jeopardies at the same time, which they call as intersectionality. That is another key concept, which is originally legally developed by her colleague and the professor of legal studies at Columbia, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. Kimberly Crenshaw, the African American woman scholar, the lead jurist of the world today. As we talk about Ambedkar, the lead jurist of the world during his time in early 20th century. That was why he was invited to be the chairman of the drafting committee of our constitution, the largest democratic constitution of the whole world, which has modeled all the other, which he studied all the American model, the British model, the French model, the German and other European models available during his time. So he was the lead jurist then. That's why he became the chairman of the architect, the chief architect of Indian Constitution. Now, if you take US, it's an African American woman, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. Crenshaw, Crenshaw. You can see she has legally developed that term called intersectionality, but it was popularized throughout the world through the speeches and writings of Bell Hooks. So tremendous kind of writing and inputs, and also in pedagogy. She has revolutionized the old paradigms, especially in relation with a critique of Paulo Freire's notion of critical pedagogy that was fashionable, especially in South America and in the southern hemisphere, in the third world like India, or in African countries and Latin America in particular. The Brazilian pedagogue, the scholar, the lead scholar of teaching, the Paulo Freire, the Marxist leftist philosopher, he has developed the notion of critical pedagogy. Critical pedagogy was ruling over the whole world, especially in the third world. But the notion of engaged pedagogy, which is actually a critical extension of critical pedagogy of Paulo Freire by Professor Bell Hooks, that has again revolutionized the notion of education and pedagogy in the whole world. So with her life-engaged pedagogy, education as life, education for life, for the improvement of life and for the improvement of human, and not just for the human, but for the whole universe, that compassionate paradigm, the Maitri, fraternity, larger fraternal paradigm that the Buddha talked about. That's another key influence on not just Jesus. She calls herself as a Buddhist Christian. So in many public speeches and in many positions, when she took a position, she used to call herself a Buddhist Christian. So she's not just a preacher of Christianity and the Jesus's notion of God as love, but also into the larger fraternity paradigm of the universal love that is Maitri, that was taught by the Buddha, the compassionate one and the enlightened one himself. So she's also related to Asia. She's also having that ethnic and cultural influences in her veins, because the parentage is not just from the African American stock, but from the Asian, Sino-American and Asian American tradition also, and also from the Amerindian tradition, the First Nation traditions of the United States, the indigenous people of America, the Amerindian tradition, the Sino-American tradition, the Asian American tradition, and of course the African American traditions. All these multicultural influences have made her teachings and her writings truly polyphonic and truly democratic and multicultural, and an inclusive model, an egalitarian democratic model for the whole world who are interested in studying culture and society and civilization and politics and history at large. So this is the legacy which we have to imbibe and we have to take as a model, as a lead scholar of contemporary cultural studies. And let us come to the issues related to cultural studies now. So cultural studies, as we know, you have been studying it from the undergraduate level onwards now. Many of you are initiated into it, and in the PG level also you are studying cultural studies. Specific courses are there. In the higher studies also, MPhil and PhD coursework also you may study it. You may continue to study it. But it is nothing but, as we know, it is nothing but the study and analysis and academic study and analysis of culture, especially contemporary culture, and culture without any distinctions, because old culturalism, especially in the British and English traditions, it was in the Matthew Arnoldian paradigm of high culturalism. So high culturalism was in fashion from the 19th century Victorian era onwards. Culture was seen as something, the prerogative and privilege of an elite group, an elite minority. Culture was seen as something minority, not in the contemporary sense, not in the democratic sense, but in the elitist sense, exclusivist sense. So only exclusive elite culture was seen, or in other words, the high culture, highbrow, high culture, elite culture, so-called classical culture, again from the touchstone method and the comparative method of Matthew Arnold. It is also called Arnoldian high culturalism. That was in fashion. F.R. Lewis was, even in early 20th century, the new critics, and F.R. Lewis, Richards, and specifically Lewis was writing in that tradition. He had that greater notion, the classical notion of language and literature and high culture, and the canon and all, the established battery, unquestionable dogmatic battery of texts and all. Lewis was writing like that. But the students of Lewis, especially a Lewisite like Raymond Williams, after the war, they have challenged and questioned and countered and totally disregarded that notion of high culturalism that was in fashion in Europe also. Kantian aesthetics was ruling supreme. They were trying to mystify beauty, and beauty was seen as a lasting universal value. But now the students of Raymond Williams, like Terry Eagleton, they have written about the politics of beauty, the ideology of the aesthetics. The ideology of the aesthetic is being dismantled by even contemporary Marxist, Catholic Marxist scholars like Terry Eagleton. So that it's not a contradiction at all. You can be a Catholic and Marxist at the same time, even in the West. Lewis and till Lewis, till the new critics, till the Victorians, they were having that elite exclusivist notion of culture, and only high culture, the culture of the nobility, the culture of the elite, the culture of the ruling classes, that was seen as the culture. But later, after the war, things have changed after the students' revolution, after the gay lesbian movement, especially after the black movement, black arts movement, and the African American revolution, after the Harlem Revolution, after the negritude movement in France and in Francophone colonial world, after Aimé Césaire and Leon Damas and Franz Fanon and all these post-colonial kind of thinkers, it has changed, and there was a kind of broadening of the vision and purview of culture. And the so-called lowbrow, the so-called low culture was also, or mass culture, earlier it was even in Adorno and Horkheimer, in the Frankfurt School and all, they used the culture industry and mass culture and all those things. Still, there is an element of denigration and stereotyping and reductionism involved. It's now called popular culture. So popular culture, as earlier called the low culture, popular culture was also included the culture of the people. There was a renewed sense of integrity and interest regarding the cultures of the people. The plurality of culture was accepted after the war in particular, and also because of the theoretical revolution that happened in the 1950s after the Second World War. The traditional Marxism has collapsed because during the early 20th century, during the heyday of fascism in Italy, with Mussolini or Hitler in Germany, that was the in thing. The elite culture, the privileged culture, the Christendom, that was ruling supreme. And only the resistance came only from the Soviet bloc then. The leftist, the Marxists were there to defend, but the Marxism also predominantly became established, and kind of it degraded into a kind of totalitarian Stalinism in particular. The party rule that was exposed in 1984, and other novels by people like British writers like George Orwell and others. So that kind of a Stalinism has created the kind of deadlock during the wars, especially in between the wars and soon after the Second World War. So Marxism and the grand plan, the class struggle, the economic determinism, the old base and superstructure Marxism, it also failed to address the cultural plurality of the world and the crucial element of culture rather than the economic base and all those reductionist, myopic kind of theories on culture and society. So therefore, there was a radical shift within the left that is called the rise of the new left. A new left developed, emerged after the war, and that was based on culture. It is also called a cultural turn in Marxism. The cultural turn was provided by people like Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist thinker. So Antonio Gramsci, for the first time, unfortunately he was tortured and imprisoned by the fascists in Italy, and be perished in the prison house of Benito Mussolini, unfortunately. But fortunately, he wrote something, and it was smuggled out of jail, and it was posthumously published in modern Italian language. And later, only after the 1950s, it was available in modern European languages like French or German and English. And then it became a catalyst for social change and cultural turn of Marxism. This is called the cultural turn in Marxism. Lawrence Grossberg and Carrie Nelson, they have written the book, edited that volume called The Cultural Turn in Marxism. There you find the essays of bell hooks and leading African-American scholars like Cornel West, for example, Toni Morrison or Cornel West and bell hooks, and all those African-American, Henry Gates Lewis Jr. and all the African-American scholars are writing about the specificity of history and culture and the importance of culture in understanding the society and polity and history of the world. So this is called the cultural turn in Marxism. This was made possible by the theory of Antonio Gramsci regarding Italian history. And he coined the term of the subaltern to refer to the people who are subjected to the hegemony of the ruling classes. That is the subaltern. And hegemony is nothing but a consensual kind of rule where even the victims are complicit in it. The victims cannot question and challenge hegemony because it's all normalized and regularized and naturalized through cultural and social practices and conditioning. It's given us tradition. So this it's not an economic kind of category and economic division. It's not an economic hierarchy and economic kind of inequality, but it is a socio-cultural and historical kind of inequality and subordination through socio-cultural means and mediums of expression. The language, for example, literary canon, for example, education system. The kind of just before that, Althusser has provided the insight about ideology and the ideological state apparatuses. And formation. So it's an ideological kind of thing. It's a hegemonic kind of thing, which is not often questioned by the victims. So that is the importance of Antonio Gramsci's interventions and his ideas on the subaltern and hegemony and the role of the intellectual, the organic intellectual. He distinguished the organic intellectual from the traditional intellectual who are serving the purposes of power for their own tokens of power. But the organic intellectuals will stand with the people who are denied justice. Subaltern or the people, that was the synonym. The people was a synonym given to the subaltern, the lower classes and the subjugated people. By subaltern, he meant it's a term originally from the military register. It denotes a soldier of most inferior, lowest rank, who is subjected to the intimidations and dominations and oppression of the higher militia upward in a hierarchical structure. So here he used the term in Italian history, in the context of Italian history, why the fascists are coming to power. He provided the answer and the insight because they are intervening in socio-cultural kind of spaces. They are molding the society, and even the victims cannot question, challenge that hegemony. They become part of it. They become agents, like patriarchy to operate, like Brahmanical patriarchy, which is there in every one of us in the Indian society. We cannot critically detach us from the clutches of Brahmanical patriarchy and Varnashrama Dharma, the caste morality of India. So likewise, in Italian history also, the fascists have played with the cultural and social fabric and structures, and they have influenced the hearts and minds of and the public culture of that society, and they came to power through the consent of the people, making a mockery, as it happened in many parts of the world, like India recently. So this is the insight provided by Antonio Gramsci, and that has played a very crucial role in the development of cultural studies, especially creating a cultural turn in Marxism, a cultural shift, a paradigm, a drastic paradigm shift in contemporary cultural studies. So the crucial ideas of Althusser regarding ideology, ideological state apparatuses, and also the subject, the autonomy and the vulnerability of the subject. And in Gramsci, you have the notion of hegemony, the consensual rule, the rule by consent, and also the people who are subjected to it, who cannot even question it, the subaltern. And he also dreamed about the subaltern coming into an absolute kind of power or hegemony one day. So the subaltern cannot enter history because the history of the subaltern is episodic and fragmented, wrote Antonio Gramsci. So Gramsci's ideas have provided the radical shift towards culture. And then it was pioneered by the British school, the British cultural studies exponents, who were mostly associated with Marxism. At the same time, they were for the new left, the radical new shift towards socio-cultural issues, superstructural issues. So they have thoroughly critiqued and departed from the old base and superstructure economic determinism, which is still having sway in Kerala and India, which is even attacking the foundation of social justice and the constitution of India through the economic determinism and economic reservation claims, which is absolutely anti-constitutional and anti-ethical and against all statistics of representation and all credentials of democracy. So this was challenged and refuted by the Gramscian paradigm and the cultural new left in Britain, especially in the writings of Raymond Williams, who was a Welsh scholar. So he was against the ethnic and cultural supremacism that was there in Britain also. He was from the lower class, working class background, and also he was a Welsh. Ethnically, he was Welsh. He was not part of the Anglo-Saxon paradigm. He was at the margin at Wales and Ireland and in Scotland and all. So Irish, Welsh, and Scottish nationalist issues are there. The Anglo-Saxon internal imperialism of Britain otherizes and marginalizes and rules over these people. Even today, IRA is fighting for complete kind of autonomy. As a Welsh scholar who was a Lewisite for some time, who was a student of F.R. Lewis, Raymond Williams questioned that hegemony, and he moved towards the analysis of culture and social factors. That is why towards the end of the 1950s, we have works like Culture and Society, The Long Revolution, novel from Dickens to Lawrence, and also Keywords in Culture. These are the seminal works that were published towards the end of the 1950s and early 1960s that formed the foundation. And then in 1957, I think Richard Hoggart, another major critical scholar and cultural exponent in Britain, again a Marxist, but part of the new left in Britain. Richard Hoggart wrote about the importance of the mass media and literacy. The uses of literacy, 1957 work. The uses of literacy. He was with the adult education and continuation of education for the working class. So he was working among the working classes. He was educating the working classes, the adults in particular, and the orphans and adults and working class people and working class children and delinquents and all. So the works like Uses of Literacy by Richard Hoggart and the British historian of the working classes, E.P. Thompson. Thompson has written something called The Making of the Working Class in Britain, in the context of Britain. So these works, Culture and Society, The Uses of Literacy by Hoggart, Culture and Society by Williams, and The Making of the English Working Class by E.P. Thompson have pioneered the study of working class culture and the so-called excluded subcultures of Britain who were suffering from the internal imperialism of the Anglo-Saxon Germanic kind of tribal regime, which is still continuing. And later they established their school at the University of Birmingham in early 1960s. In 1964, Hoggart was appointed as the founder director of the School for Contemporary Cultural Studies at Birmingham University, the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies at the University of Birmingham in Britain, which is otherwise called the CCCS, Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies. 1964, Hoggart was the founder director. But later, from 1968 onwards, as assistant and associate, the Jamaican West Indian scholar, the black man Stuart Hall, he became the leading exponent. And later, people like Angela McRobbie, women scholars like Angela McRobbie and Paul Gilroy, the Afro-British intellectual, sociologist at LSE, and also at the London University. Paul Gilroy, who is the author of Black Atlantic and Small Acts and After Empire and all. Paul Gilroy have extended the critique of race in particular. Earlier, they were looking into issues of class and also gender. But when Stuart Hall and Paul Gilroy in particular, when they were leading the institution, they focused more on the issue, the crucial issue, the unaddressed issue of race and racism and sexism, the intersectional issues as well, along with the issues of key issue of class in Britain and Europe. So, unfortunately, in the logic of late capitalism, in the neoliberal policies of the state, which is known in the infamous way as Thatcherism, Margaret Thatcher and her right-leaning kind of regime, they have adopted the neoliberal policies of the privatization agenda of neoliberal policies, the globalization agenda, and the privatization agenda of late capitalism. And through their neoliberal policies, they have chalked that center, triple CS, into its death. But it has traveled to other parts of the world by that time. By 1980s and 1990s, it has become, cultural studies have revolutionized the whole world, especially the American world. And most of the journals and most of the leading departments are now in American universities. And it's a thriving thing in South Asia also, in India also. Even in India, we have centers, many centers are there. Our IFLU in Hyderabad and University of Hyderabad, they are having cultural studies. Most of the English departments are transformed into, throughout the world, especially in Asia and Africa, they have transformed into cultural studies departments or departments on contemporary culture or the related indigenous cultures and languages and all. We have the decolonization in Africa and Ngugi wa Thiong'o and others who are arguing for that kind of a decolonization and indigenization of that thing. We have people like Indian scholars like Spivak and all who are talking about that. Even in India, G.N. Devi and other leading Indian English critics, they are talking about indigeneity, indigenization of the pedagogy and education, and the issue of language is also crucial in that. So it has transformed the whole world. But the crucial question that we are addressing today, that we need to ask today is this global model a universal thing? Or do we have to think about alternative ways of developing cultural studies? Alternative, not in the what you call in the traditional sense. When you talk about alternative models, suddenly the Purusha Sukta model, the Vedic or the Brahmanical model, the dominant model, the so-called Hindu model would be there in India. But we have the other traditions as well in India. The Indian culture or Indian cultures in plural, we have to talk about literatures of India, Indian literatures that are being taught, the post-colonial literatures that are taught, the new literatures that are taught. So like literatures, we should also have a notion of cultures within the nationality, within a nation state, or within a particular state. You have the cultural plurality, because plurality and diversity, it is the essence of every culture. It is the reality of the world, plurality and diversity. So we have to take into account that plurality and diversity and the kind of regional diversity that is existing. And we need to shape this cultural studies. We need to mold and set the agendas of the cultural studies, the intersectional agendas. In the West, it is race, along with class and gender. Sexuality also. In a place, a traditional cultural society like India, which is ruled by this Varnashrama Dharma, the Chaturvarnya system, or the Purusha Sukta system, of Chaturvarnya or Varnashrama Dharma. It is caste that is to be addressed. In the West, it is class. It's a class-divided society. The economic issue is pivotal, but still they are talking about racism and the intersection of racism and sexism and classism. So in India, we need to talk about the issue of casteism. We need to address the socio-cultural, historic, political reality of caste and its divide and rule policy, the Varnashrama Dharma regime, the lasting empire, the internal imperialism of caste in India, and caste nexus with gender discrimination. That's what the Indian feminists and Dalit Bahujan feminists in India are talking about, the Brahmanical patriarchy. So as bell hooks addresses white capitalist supremacist heteropatriarchy, we also need to address the key issue of Brahmanical patriarchy or Brahmanical heteropatriarchy in India. So only by addressing the important, crucial issues of caste and a caste nexus with gender, because both are embodied and engendered forms of subordination and hegemony in Indian context. Only through a critique of caste, cultural studies can emerge as the radical model or the appropriate model or the apt model for India and Kerala in particular. So we have to look into the cultural specificities and the cultural history of India, the social formations of India, the non-economic determining crucial elements in Indian society and polity, and refashion the models provided by the British Cultural School and also the American school and the South Asian schools that are in plenty. Because of lack of time, it's already 1 hour. That's why I need to conclude here. Let me once again thank the department and Government College Attingal for this wonderful occasion to remember Professor Bell Hooks, and also speak a few words about contextualization and justification of cultural studies in the Indian and Kerala context. Thank you very much. Let me hear from you now.
Thank you so much, sir. What better way to celebrate Bell Hooks' legacy? You gave us the best possible homage to Bell Hooks. So you also provided us with a new outlook towards Bell Hooks' worldview. I love the fact that you connected Bell Hooks' patriarchy to our Brahminical tradition, and not just Brahminical tradition, to many other traditions all across the world. Thank you so much, sir. And you also traced the evolution of cultural studies. You actually made things easier for us, because I am the one who, I and Nisha ma'am are the ones who teach cultural studies for the students. You actually made our jobs easier. Thank you, sir. You also touched upon all the key terms of cultural studies. So now the webinar is open for discussion. If you have a question, you can either unmute your mic and ask, or you can post it in the comment section.
Thank you, sir, for the enriching talk. Really mesmerized to hear it, was taking down notes. Had a wonderful experience, sir. So could you please tell us how this concept of the Arnoldian high culture has changed nowadays? What change has come over that? Now we are readily accepting the kind of new culture or things that were not already earlier considered to be something of high culture. Sir, could you please explain that?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Smita, for that key question on culturalism, the debate on culturalism. So in the British tradition, or in the English context, as I told you, from the beginning, especially from the what you call the Victorian era, Matthew Arnold's notion of high culturalism in culture and anarchy, and also in studies on poets, studies on poetry, he develops a notion of minority culture. Culture is seen as something that is the best that has been written and thought about and spoken about. So only that best, that classical, the so-called classical, the lasting, the so-called universal, all these things in quotes, these were seen as culture. And Arnold in particular, he had a kind of contempt for the culture of the people in Dover Beach and in Scholar Gypsy and in many poems. He talks about this notion, or he extends and develops this notion of the culture as a prerogative, a privileged prerogative of a few elite minority. So that was accepted because in comparative literature also, which was pioneered by him, we have the notion of the touchstone method, where you test the new works of literature, of writing, with the old established battery. The canon was there as the touchstone, the standard, and each new work will the critique will have to test it on that touchstone of the so-called classics. So that has formed a foundation of comparative literature also. Recently, in 2005 and all, the professor of comparative literature at Columbia, Spivak, Gayatri Spivak herself, she declared the death of that comparative literature, the old canonical notion of classics and all. And she declared the inauguration of cultural studies and area studies in particular. The region, I didn't get time to elaborate about the notions of cultural studies and regional cultures and regional or area studies. So even Spivak, who is a disillusioned, well-experienced professor of comparative literature at Columbia, she declared the death of that discipline. That's the title, Death of a Discipline. I think it was published somewhere between 2002 and 2005. Now the small book is available here also. Indian editions are also there. The Death of a Discipline. So this was in fashion, and also it was working in tandem with Kantian aesthetics in the continent, in the German and French traditions also. Beauty was seen as something universal and lasting, and they mystified and they have been traditionally seeing, especially after the writings of Hegel and Kant, in a way that they immortalized and they have transcendentalized and mystified beauty as the virtue, as the in thing. So they have completely discarded the issues of reality and truth and justice and history and politics, and they had this aesthetic kind of view. So aesthetics and beauty were celebrated and over-celebrated. And likewise in Arnoldian high culturalism, only the culture, the elite culture, the classical culture was seen as the culture, and the culture of the people, the culture of the working classes, the culture of women. We know that women were not even given franchise or voting power in Europe till early 20th century. So English was actually the language of women, like in the Sanskrit plays. Women are speaking Prakrit. Even in Kudiyattam and in the Sanskrit theatre traditions, women and Shudras and Avarnas and Lechas, they are speaking Prakrit and uncouth, the so-called uncouth language, the languages in which Buddha taught and the Tirthankaras taught the people. They addressed the people. And Jesus also, he touched the lepers and the sex workers, and he was speaking to the fisher folk, and he was actually pulling their fishing nets. He was going to the sea. He was even walking on water. So they were never touching these polluting things. They had this high cultural, elitist, exclusivist, classical notion of culture. And Arnold has actually he has established this thing as a literary virtue. So that's the issue of Arnoldian high culturalism. You can read the critique of Arnoldian high culturalism in the post-colonial critique, Edward W. Said, in Culture and Imperialism in particular. In the introduction itself, Edward Said begins with a scathing, very analytical critique of Kantian aesthetics and Matthew Arnoldian high culturalism. So in cultural studies, in Raymond Williams and Hogarth and E.P. Thompson and Stuart Hall and Paul Gilroy and others, you have a re-embracing and a kind of recovery of the people's culture, or the so-called popular culture, which was condemned as the lowbrow and the low culture and the vulgar culture, the uncouth, uncivilized. And that's how the change happened, because they all came from the working classes and the so-called other races as well, from the Welsh, Irish, Scottish margins, or from the colonies, like Stuart Hall, who came from West Indies, because their parents were from Africa and they were taken as bonded slaves. And during the Middle Atlantic passages, during the slave era, the slave trade happened after the Columbus and other navigators, and their parents and ancestors were brought to Guyana and Antigua and Jamaica and Kingston and all. So that's how the Africans, the black people, reached West Indies, which is the mid part of the American continents, the Americas, in the White Sargasso Sea, the Caribbean, as we call it today. So when they came into cultural studies, when they came into academia, into the university system, into the triple CS in particular, they have revolutionized, and they have tried to recover and incorporate people's cultures, especially culture as ordinary. A statement from Raymond Williams will tell you, culture as ordinary. Culture is a whole way of life, says Williams. Culture is a whole way of struggle, asserts E.P. Thompson. And culture precipitates at the bottom. What you see at the social bottom, that is what is culture. Not on the high echelon, not the what you call the creamy layer, but the what is at the bottom that precipitates, as love precipitates, as water precipitates. What is at the bottom is culture. So culture is ordinary. Culture is a whole way of life. That is the renewed democratizing kind of a perspective, a more egalitarian, democratic, and pluralistic kind of inclusive philosophy and concern on culture that we have in cultural studies.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for connecting the arena with all these spheres of literature and giving a political, social, and historical perspective of the statement. Thank you so much, sir.
Anyone else has a question? If this is the case, shall we proceed to the concluding session? Okay. So, dear participants, before that, I have an announcement to make. We have posted the link that takes you to the feedback form in the chat section. Kindly fill in and let us know your feedback. Okay, now I invite Lakshmi P., Assistant Professor, Department of English, Government College, Attingal, to propose the vote of thanks.
Good evening. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good evening all. Honorable dignitaries, distinguished guests, respected principal and dear participants. On behalf of Government College Attingal and organizing committee members of Department of English, I feel immense pleasure to take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks to our eminent chief guest, Dr. Ajay S. Shekhar, Assistant Professor, Research Supervisor and Coordinator of Center for Buddhist Studies, Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kaladi, for such a wonderful and informative session on culture studies and regional cultures, questions of contextualization and justification. Thanks a lot, sir. I would further extend my hearty thanks to our respected principal, Dr. Sita Lakshmi ma'am for motivating us and even guiding us to organize such a webinar. Next, I would like to thank our beloved head of the department, Lakshmi Chandrasekhar ma'am, for her immense support and confidence in us. And I would also thank our IQC coordinator, Dr. Sunildar sir, for all the support, and also Smita ma'am for organizing such an informative and valuable session. Finally, I would like to thank all the faculties and participants for all the support for this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all for joining us. Wishing you all a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.